So, welcome. My name is Katie Morris. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. I am so excited that we have our guests joining us. Karen Richards and Marianne Graham are joining us from our Maryland Board of Social Work Examiners. They're going to be sharing information about licensure at the bachelor's, master's, and clinical level. And again, we're really excited to have such strong attendance. We have some alumni joining us tonight, current students and prospective students. So we're really excited to welcome both Karen and Marianne here for tonight's presentation. Again, if you're just arriving, we will save questions for the end. Abby and I will be monitoring the chat and we'll work to ensure that as many questions as possible are answered in our time here. So I'll pass it over to you, Karen. Thank you.
Thank you, Katie. Okay, again, I'm Karen Richards, and I'm the Executive Director here at the Maryland Board of Social Work Examiners. I've been a licensed social worker in Maryland for over 30 years, and I was privileged to serve on the board for 6 years. I've worked in public agencies throughout Maryland, including most recently, before coming to the board, I worked for the Maryland Department of Juvenile Services. So we're going to do kind of an overview of the board makeup, and then Ms. Graham, who is the Director of Licensing and Certification here at the board, will kind of finish up with some information around licensing. The Board of Social Work Examiners is one of 22 health occupation boards, and we're all housed underneath of the Department of Health. All of the boards are self-funded through license fees. Each board has different rules, but we all kind of share the same mission. And again, the mission of the health occupation boards is to protect the citizens of Maryland through the promotion of high quality health care, and that's achieved through the maintenance of an efficient licensure system, promotion of disciplinary practices that contribute to an overall culture of accountability, education of clients and other stakeholders, and enforcement of applicable laws and statutes. And in the case of social workers, our laws and statutes all fall under Health Occupation Title 19. And this essentially is the Social Work Practice Act. And the Social Work Practice Act was actually enacted in July of 1975. And it was at that time through the combination of the advocacy of social workers who worked in healthcare settings. There were a lot of social workers from Sinai Hospital, from the University of Maryland School of Social Work downtown, community behavioral health centers where a lot of social workers were working, and of course the Department of Human Services, or the Department of Social Services, which also employed a lot of social workers. Through their collective efforts, they were able to petition the state legislature to pass our act. And the General Assembly found, because social worker profoundly affects the lives, health, safety, and welfare of the people of the state, and therefore legislation was passed to assure that social workers are, again, the main mission is to protect the public, but that's done by maintaining high standards of professionalism and setting minimum standards for entry into being a licensed social worker. So that's our statute. And this is kind of a basic question, but I think it's kind of important when you start talking about licensing in Maryland is, again, to kind of think about where do social workers work. So if people could maybe throw in the chat a couple different places where you know that social workers work, kind of give us some, what just kind of the different places where you find social workers. Hospitals, schools, courts, yep. Hospitals, assisted living facilities, schools, shelters, yep. Homeless shelters, yep. Hospice, correctional facilities, yep. Child welfare, prisons, yep. The correction system, private practices, yep. So kind of shows that social workers really are kind of working in a lot of different settings. We work in a lot of different settings, and we touch the lives of a lot of different members of the public or citizens. So again, this is why the state legislature back in 1975 said that this is a profession that warrants being regulated, and again, not only for protecting the public, but also for withholding the standards for social workers. And again, this is kind of basic 101 social work, but what's the difference between macro and micro social work? So, you know, again, if anybody wants to throw a couple things in the chat for, you know, what is macro versus micro social work? Macro policy, yep. Again, yep, systematic, there you go. Micro is the individual, yep. Individual, micro, society, individual versus systems, yep. So why is licensing important for the social work profession? I think because, again, whether you're at the, advocating for community as the whole, legislative, micro 101. So it's easy to see with micro social work how social workers touch on the individual groups, families, and you can, it's easy to define how that would be important to regulate or license. Macro is, you know, a little bit different. Like, you're talking about the system. Is it necessary to be licensed at the macro level? You know, there are a lot of social workers who do very important work at the macro level, and they don't feel that licensing is important for them because, again, they're doing advocacy work. They may be running community programs. They may not just be touching individuals and having an impact. I would say that licensing is just as important for macro as it is for micro, for mainly for the perspective of being able to understand if by understanding the individual and the importance of protecting the public, it can inform and help your macro practice. But again, there are a lot of MSWs and BSWs who do practice and important social work in the macro fields who whose jobs titles might not require that they be licensed. And again, why is licensing important? You know, again, two reasons, going to keep going back to it. It's protecting the public, but more important, it's being recognized as a profession. And being able to uphold standards, being able to impart when some of the Social Work Practice Act back in 1975, as the Practice Act evolved, the clinical license level came up so that social workers could bill insurance companies and get reimbursed and be able to do things such as emergency petitions, and to be able to be seen as professionals and make more money. I mean, it really comes down to being able to compete in the professions with, in the case of behavioral health, with psychologists or licensed professional counselors, or so that's why licensing is important.
Also, Karen, I would just say also that in Maryland, you cannot call yourself a social worker unless you're licensed. So it's not that people can't do important work if they're not licensed, but in order to be called a social worker, you have to be licensed.
Thank you, Marianne. Yes, that's very important, particularly in Maryland. It's title protection. So you earned your degree. You can put your BSW, your MSW, your letters after your name. Those are important designations that you earned through your education. But in order to call yourself a licensed bachelor social worker or a licensed master social worker, an LMSW or an LBSW, you have to be licensed with the state of Maryland. Our Title 14 has title protection in there for licensed social workers. So yes, that's an important part of the act. And again, it's the idea of holding up the professional standards for social workers. So we talked a lot about the different areas. Everybody, let me read some of the comments. Licensing is important so everybody is on the same page ethically, legally, and regulatory. Yep, no matter micro, meso, or macro. Exactly. If you're at the macro level and you're advocating for individuals and clients or communities or groups, it's important to kind of uphold the same ethics as social workers that are working at that micro level. Thank you. So we talked a little about, and I wanted everybody to kind of think a little bit about the different places we work, because the Board of Social Work, first off, what is it? So we adopt the rules, regulations, and we have a code of ethics. We maintain records, we hold hearings, we publish annual lists of licensed and disciplined social workers, and we investigate violations of the law. And by law, I mean violations of the Social Work Practice Act or Title 19. Okay. And the board members, not staff, are the ones that review all of the complaints and discipline matters that come before the board, and they make a decision. And our board is actually made up of 12 members. And the way Title 19 and the state legislature set up the structure of the board is they recognize that the state, one, that social workers work in a variety of practices, which is kind of why I had you put that out there. There's hospital, social worker, school, private practice. In addition, social work practice in Maryland is varied depending on where you live. So a social worker who practices on the Eastern Shore, their practice might look a little different than a social worker who practices in inner city Baltimore, right? Because their clients might be different or their needs are different. So our board members are made up of 10 licensed social workers. One has to be a bachelor, one has to be a master's, one is at least a LCSW, 4 are the LCSW-C. We always have one licensed social worker employed by Department of Human Services or Department of Social Services, because again, they are a large employer of social workers within the state of Maryland. And then we also have one board member who is a licensed social worker who's primarily engaged in social work education. We currently have Dr. Daniels from Morgan as in our education seat, and Dr. Ickes from UMBC was most recently in our education seat as well. And again, the board is made up of the diversity. The board members are appointed by the governor's appointment office, and they do try to make sure that the board members are from a variety of practice settings in a variety of areas. For example, we have a social board member who practices in school social work in St. Mary's County. So again, we have a hospital social worker. We have a social worker. Our board chair right now is primarily engaged working with the substance abuse in the substance abuse arena. So again, the board is made up of made to represent the diversity of the practice within social work practice within the state of Maryland. Our board meetings are held the second Friday of each month. And again, we do have an open session and members of the public are encouraged to attend. And we do have a link there. We have a hybrid schedule. So sometimes we have in-person meetings, and then we also have virtual meetings. And again, members of the public are encouraged to attend. Does anyone have any questions at this time, kind of on the structure of the board? Questions? Okay.
If you want to raise your hand, we can unmute, or we can, thanks, Mel. I'm going to unmute you. Sorry, Mel. I'm looking for you. Abby, do you see her?
It's okay. If you want to drop it in the chat, I'm reading the chat. So if you wanted to, or if you want to save the question to the end, that'd be fine too.
Yeah. Oh, here you are, Mel.
But again, when I have highlighted here on the slide, the code of ethics, and I just want to touch on that a minute. There's the code of ethics. NASW has a code of ethics for social work, and that's kind of the overall social work code of ethics. And everyone should look at NASW's site, be very familiar with the code of ethics, but we also encourage you to go to Title 19 if you're going to be licensed and look at our code of ethics as well, because how does the governor decide the board members? Is there an application process? Yes, there is. You can actually, this link I have there, and prep classes, I'll answer that one in a minute. So if you go to this link, there's the application to apply to be a board member. There are different ways you can do it. Either you can be recommended by somebody in the social work profession. For example, somebody who's a member of NASW Maryland can recommend you. You can also fill out an application, and you can get signatures from social workers and people in the profession to recommend you. So all the information about applying to the board can be found on that site. The other two members, thank you. I almost missed them. The other two members are consumer members. And that's because social work affects the public. So we always do have two members who are not social workers, and they are members of the public. Yep. Okay. Good questions. Thank you. And we'll answer some more questions at the end. All right, so I'm just going to do this slide, and then I'm going to hand it over to Ms. Graham. So here's our license levels. It's the LBSW, the LMSW, and the LCSW-C, which is the Licensed Certified Social Worker Clinical. We did have LCSW, which was a Licensed Certified Social Worker. We had that. We actually had 4 levels. Most states and jurisdictions have 3 levels. So several years ago, the board voted to eliminate, to stop offering the LCSW. We still have 290 active LCSWs in Maryland. But again, our advanced clinical level is the LCSW-C. We have the independent practice status, which is available for LBSWs and LMSWs. And independent practice means to practice bachelor's or master's social work without the requirement of supervision by another social worker. All right, Ms. Graham, I'm gonna let you take over.
Okay, thank you. Just as a little introduction of myself, I have been a licensed social worker in Maryland since 2004, so 21 years. Actually, October 30th was my anniversary of when I moved to Maryland. And I, like Karen, have been practicing in a number of settings. I used to work for Kennedy Krieger when I first moved here, both in their treatment foster care program and also in their social work outpatient mental health center, which is where we worked with folks, children, adolescents, and adults with developmental or other disabilities and some kind of mental health issue that they needed that they needed help with. And I left there to move to the VA, where I worked for the HUD-VASH program, so VA Veteran Assisted Supportive Housing, and worked there for 8 years before coming to the state. And so I've always had an interest in the legislative process and the policy around social work and licensure. So I was glad to come to the board, and I've been here for about 2 years now, going into my 3rd year. So and that's just a little bit about me. But so as you can see, licensing really got going, even though the act was put into place in 75, the licensure really started going in 79. And as you can see from this slide, we just talk about how much it's grown since 1979. So basically, we started off with the kind of slightly different titles. So we had the, I think it was LSWA, or Licensed Social Work Associate, which is now the Licensed Bachelor Social Work. We started off with Licensed Graduate Social Workers. Actually, when I started in 2004, I was an LGSW, and now that is the Licensed Master Social Worker, and of course the Licensed Certified Social Workers. And so that was the people often wonder, because in most states LCSW means Licensed Clinical Social Worker, but in Maryland it means Licensed Certified Social Worker, and that's because that was what was in place prior to the Social Work Practice Act. And so people, I guess, wanted to keep that title, and so they needed to differentiate once the clinical aspect came along, and people wanted to start practicing clinically and doing more micro work, or to define the micro work. And so that's how it became the -C, or the LCSWC, because that was attached to Licensed Certified Social Worker. And as you can see, back in 1979, we had 4,192 social workers, and now we have 20,770 social workers. And it continues to grow, because we are getting, applications all the time. So there are a lot of folks. So someone asked in the chat, well, I think I'm going to wait and answer some of the questions at the end, because I think we'll get a chance to go through that. We'll try to leave enough time to make sure that happens. Okay, Karen, next slide, please. Okay, so licensure criteria. I know everybody is wanting to know, what is the criteria? And I'm so glad that this is, that UMBC is offering this information, because I have to tell you, when I was in school, and I graduated in 2003 from Marywood University in Scranton, Pennsylvania, we were in our last semester in the month of April, I believe, before I heard anything about licensing. And I remember one of our professors, we were in class, and my professor brought it up, and we were all looking at each other like, licensing? What do you mean licensing? You got to get licensed? What? And that was my first introduction to it. So I'm glad. I hope some of you are not in your last semester getting this information, because it's actually very important. Any state that you go to within the United States, any territory within the United States, has some kind of licensing law and some kind of rules about practicing social work. And you don't want to get yourself in trouble. So wherever you are, if you're staying in Maryland, or if you're going to be moving to another state, you need to be aware that that's the case, and to familiarize yourself with what those laws are, because you are going to be held accountable to those laws. Okay, so licensure criteria. For the LBSW, you have to have a Bachelor of Arts or Science in social work. In some states, you don't actually have to have a degree in social work from an accredited social work program by the Council on Social Work Education, but in Maryland, you do. So we do periodically get people who are moving here who want to become a social worker, and unfortunately they are not allowed to, because under our Social Work Practice Act, you have to have a Bachelor of Social Work or a Master of Social Work. So I mentioned the Council on Social Work Education. You have to graduate from a Council on Social Work Education accredited university or college. And that is also something that people, in fact, I have a question in my email right now from somebody who is considering going to a school that's in the process of getting accredited. And that's a chance, because if that school doesn't pass the accreditation and the person graduates from that school, but they don't end up being an accredited by CSWE, they're not going to be able to be licensed in Maryland. So that is something to, that people have to be aware of and pay attention to. So for LBSWs, again, they have to submit and receive approval from the board to take the bachelor's exam. Everybody who is going to be licensed in Maryland has to take an exam. And right now, our exam provider is Association of Social Work Boards, or ASWB. So that is something also for people to be aware. And of course, there are fees associated with this, so you have to incorporate that into your planning. So you have to pay an application fee and then an initial licensing fee in order to obtain your license from the board. And in, I believe it was 2022, the Maryland legislature put in a new law for all health occupations. So not just social workers, but all health occupations also have to have a criminal history record check, which requires fingerprinting. So there's a fee for that as well. So, and I say all this not to, discourage people, but to let you know, sometimes when you're in a profession that requires licensing, there are going to be fees involved, and you have to kind of start planning ahead for them, because as long as you are licensed in whatever state or jurisdiction, there are going to be fees involved. So you need to know that now so you can kind of prepare yourself for that. And so for LMSWs, it's pretty much the same. You have to have a Master of Social Work from a CSWE accredited university or school. You have to be approved to sit for the master's exam, which is also administered by ASWB. And you have to pay the application fee and the initial licensing fee. And I forgot to say what those fees are. So the application fee for any application in Maryland is $100, and the initial licensing fee, and that is for both the LBSW, the LMSW, and the LCSWC, is $75. So you're looking at $175. And the criminal history background check, if you get it done at the Criminal Justice Information System Central Repository, which is here in Baltimore, their fee is $51.25. You also have to do things like send in as part of the application, you have to send in your university official transcript. We can't accept it from you. It has to be directly from the university. So those are usually between $10 and $15. So again, I'm just letting you know this not to depress you, but to help you prepare so that you can start planning and be aware of some of the things that you're going to have to do.
Yeah, and Marianne, just real quick. So somebody asked if the fees are paid yearly. No, the application fee and the license fee are one time. Now, if you apply for a different license, say you have your LMSW, you've done what you want, and you're applying, then you're going to apply for another application fee. Once you're licensed, you have to renew your license every 2 years. In Maryland, it's every 2 years, and there is a renewal fee at that time. But the initial application and license fees are one-time only fees. Okay?
Right. Yep. And just to mention, we have a website, and all of this information is actually on the website. The website is not the most user-friendly website I've ever been to, and we are working on making it a little more user-friendly for everyone. But I do encourage people to just go on, check out the different pages, read the information. There's a whole page just about the fees that are involved in terms of all of this stuff. So I just want to encourage you, to check out the website when you get a chance. And once you're licensed, we also have a newsletter that we send out.
Yeah.
I think right now we're doing every 2 months, right, Karen? But
Yeah.
I think the hope is to eventually go monthly. It used to only be in the winter winter and the summer. So
All right.
we're improving with that. So
yeah.
I
Oh,
want
Marianne.
people to encourage you to, make sure that you keep your email address updated with us so that you can get that information.
Okay.
Okay.
I'm going to just really quick, Marianne, I'm going to answer a really quick couple of questions. Okay. And then let's move on to the next slide because we want to be mindful of people's time. No, you don't have to redo the test when you renew your license. Okay. Once you take the test for the license level that you have, that's it. You do have to do continuing education credits. Okay. So I don't know. One thing that attracted me to the social work profession was the idea that you get to keep learning. So, the field of social work is constantly evolving and changing. Practice methods change. So it's really important to stay abreast of what's happening in the profession. Even if you're on the macro level, things are changing. What's happening in the community or the environment. Everything's always changing. So you need to keep educating yourself. So we do require that you take continuing education credits when you renew. It's 40 for an LMSW. It's 30 for the LBSW level. So that's something to think about. But again, I kind of always like the idea that you get to keep learning in order to stay licensed. And if you go straight into the master's program after earning your bachelor's, do you need to take the LBSW exam? It depends on what you're doing. I happen to be, after I got my LBSW, I got a job where they required the license. So I did get my license at the LBSW level. It was LSWA at the time, but I did have that license level because my job required it. And then I was working on my master's degree. And then once I completed that, I got my LMSW and then I took the LCSW and now I have my LCSW-C. So it really does depend on kind of what your situation or your job situation is. And that's important. Where do you take these continuing learning credits? We have board approved sponsors who provide the continuing education. You can take courses at the universities that would count towards your continuing education credits. So why do most employers require the MSW but not the BSW? I don't know. I think there are good jobs out there in the BSW field. One of our board members who's a BSW, she works in the geriatric field. And she supervises other BSWs. A lot of BSWs work in some of the hospital settings, foster care, but it just really depends on the provider. Where's a good place to look for BSW jobs? I found mine on the, I actually worked at the Department of Social Services with my BSW in Baltimore County. Yeah. You can find your continuing educations. We're getting a lot of questions here. So the cost of them, yeah, no, I get what you're saying at the university, but there are a lot of sponsors that provide other, some employers will pay for a continuing education credit. It's something to, it's a good question to ask when you're applying for jobs. You employ a lot of social workers. Do you provide any continuing education opportunities for you? Always ask about supervision. What kind of supervision do you provide? So.
Right. In terms of, I just wanted to add, in terms of continuing education, there are also opportunities to get free CEUs. Periodically, there are, some places like, I know Maryland Center for Problem Gambling always used to have a conference every year that would provide free CEUs, and then they would have various training. So you kind of have to look. You have to talk to other social workers. I know that SAMHSA, which I don't know if they still are in operation because of what's going on with our government, but SAMHSA used to have some free trainings that they would do every year. I know there's a free training I do every year at the National Council on Aging. They do a free training. So you kind of have to plan it out over the 2 years that you have to get these. You don't have to spend a lot of money on it, but you have to plan for it. And of course, you can spend spend money on CEUs as well, but there are ways to do it, and I would encourage you to talk to other social workers because you'll find out from different people. I still have friends from when I worked at the VA that will email me, "Hey, Marianne, there's this free CEU happening at this particular sponsor." So that is something to also keep in mind.
Yeah. And also a plug for the schools. If you become a field instructor, you get a lot of free CEUs by being a field instructor.
Great. Okay.
Right.
Karen, are you still answering questions, or are we? I know. I don't want to interrupt if you had any that you wanted to address.
No, I think let's kind of move through the slides. Let's try to kind of move through them quick because we have a lot of questions. And I found I did when I was at the UMBC last week, I found that it's answering questions a better way than our boring slides. So
yes,
you know what I mean? Just kind of move through the slides pretty quick,
okay.
And then we're going to answer some questions.
Sure. Okay, so the LCSWC, you have to have your master's degree, of course, from a Council on Social Work Education accredited school. You, in Maryland, you have to be a licensed master social worker in order to get the LCSWC. So if you're working in Maryland with Maryland clients, you have to be an LMSW first before you can become an LCSWC. As part of it, you have to complete 12 clinical course credits, and at least 6 of them have to be during your master's program. So if you're somebody that had a bachelor's in social work and then you did the advanced standing to become a master of social work, we can take some of those clinical course credits from your bachelor of social work, but you have to have at least 6 of them during the master's program. And we often get questions about, well, what courses? We don't have a specific course list, but basically we're going to be looking at your official transcript to see what courses you took, and we're looking for things like that are more talking about interventions that you might be doing with individuals, families, and groups. So that's kind of a general thing, and most people have those. Since I've been here, there's only been a couple of times, I would say, where I had to say to somebody, "I'm sorry, you don't have the correct coursework. You're going to have to take another course." So it happens fairly rarely. And we don't really have the staff to get a flood of people sending us their transcripts. But in some situations, I may say to somebody, "Okay, send me your transcript and your unofficial transcript, and I'll look at it to see, if you think you might need to take another course or something." So but most people are able to do that within their master's program. Okay, so the nitty gritty. So you have your LMSW. You have to complete 2 years, no less than 104 weeks. So when the statute and the regulations say 2 years, when you send your application in, if it's less than 2 years, if it's less than 104 weeks of experience, we're going to send it back to you and say, "Hey, you don't have this amount of time. You need to wait until you reach that 2 years." Sometimes people either are pressured by their job or they're just eager themselves to, move on with their profession. And that's great, but it says 2 years, which means 104 weeks. And if it's less than 104 weeks, you're not going to be able to continue with the process until you reach that 104 weeks. So you have to have 3,000 hours during that 104 weeks of social work experience, which includes 1,500 hours. So 1,500 hours of that 3,000 hours has to be direct face-to-face client contact, meaning where you're sitting with the client, the client's family, and having that experience. And you have to complete 100 hours of face-to-face supervision with a qualified board-approved LCSWC supervisor under contract. So we often get questions about, well, can we be supervised by other disciplines? In some states you can, but in Maryland you cannot. So you have to have a supervisor who's board approved. We have actually a database where you can look up board approved supervisors, which I encourage everyone to do when you start working. check your supervisor's credentials to make sure they're board approved, and make sure that you have that signed contract and you save it. Okay, next slide, please, Karen. Okay, so this is a little bit difficult to read. It'll be a little bit easier when you guys get the slides yourself. But this is the process for the bachelor's and the master's. So I won't go through it completely, but basically this is the process that you would follow. You follow the green arrows, and it kind of lets you know what you have to do. Basically, there's two ways to be licensed, either through examination or endorsement. Endorsement is really for people who are from out of state, who have a bachelor's or a master's, and are licensed in another state and want to be licensed in Maryland. Maybe they're moving here for a job or for some other reason. Examination is probably more for people like you all who are students, and hopefully you'll be practicing in Maryland when you graduate. So you would be practicing, you would be applying by examination. So I'm not going to go through this whole slide, but our goal is eventually to have this up on our website, but you guys will get it in the slide deck. So check it out, and if you have questions, you'll have our emails at the end of this. So I encourage you to email us any questions that you have. Okay, next slide, Karen. Thank you. Okay, so just a little bit about the Association of Social Work Boards. ASWB is the member organization for state regulatory boards, and also the regulatory boards in Canada, and also the other territories within the United States. And so they support social work regulation to ensure that safe, ethical practice and public protection is being practiced. They also create the licensing exam. They educate member jurisdiction. So Maryland is a member jurisdiction of ASWB about regulatory issues, and they promote consistent regulation and license portability. They have been very involved with the Social Work Compact, which I hope all of you have heard about. There is a Social Work Compact, and Maryland passed legislation in the 2025 legislative session to make us part of the compact. So once it is up and operational, Maryland social workers will be able to apply for a compact license and then be able to practice in compact states, of which I think there's 31 right now, right, Karen? Is it 31?
Yep, there's 31 states, and again with ASWB, they're kind of like a trade organization for social work boards. Yes, they primarily do the exam. That is the bulk of their work, but they do provide a lot of services to the social work boards. They provide training for our board members. And again, talking about like free training. So, if you're a board member and you go to new board member training, they give you CEUs. And so there are a lot of ways to get CEUs by getting involved in organizations like the board, or getting involved with an organization like ASWB or NASW. So again, that's just an important thing to think about after you graduate. Social work is a demanding profession. Didn't touch on the idea of burnout, but I'm sure your professors and all have talked to you all about that.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of like, oh, you mean after my very demanding social work job, I also have to be involved in organizations and do committees and things like that. But I can tell you, from having practiced 30 years in the state of Maryland, my involvement with the board for 6 years, it's just that ability to go out and interact with colleagues from the profession. It's your way of getting support. Right now, if you're in school, you've got the support of your colleagues, or you're doing field practice and you have your professors. But once you get out there and you're practicing on your own, outside of who you're working with in your agency or organization, it's just really good to interact with professionals through involvement in organizations like ASWB, the board, NASW, the council. There's a clinical social work organization that of DC, I believe. And so it's just a really important thing. And
Mhm.
ASWB does provide a lot of support to our board and our board members.
Right. And I would agree with Karen. Okay.
And there's the social work compact.
Yes. So the
So
social work compact, we touched a little bit about it, but it went into effect on October 1st. However, because it's still being developed by the Social Work Compact Commission, there are no licenses that have been issued at this time. I think right now they're projecting summer 2026, hopefully. So we will be keeping an eye out on that. The Social Work Compact does have a website, so I would encourage you, if you just Google Social Work Compact, you should be able to get to their website, and they have information and updates on there that will give you information. Also, once it gets ready to be operational, we will be having more information about it. I'm sure NASW has been very involved with it, and so they will have information. There'll be a lot of places where you'll be able to get information about how you can get a social work compact license, and it will be all license levels that are able to get this. So if you're practicing at the bachelor's level, the master's level, or the clinical level, you'll be able to get a compact license. And the information about how to do that, as I said, will be widely blasted once they have all the rules. They're still in the process of developing a vendor for the database that's going to be necessary for this.
They have the vendor for the database, but again, it's a large project with 31 states.
Mm-hmm.
They're still kind of finalizing the rules, but again, the hope is that social workers are going to be able to start applying for the multi-state license in 2026. It is important that at the LB, the LM, or the LCSW-C level, if you apply for the national license, there is the requirement that you pass the exam. I know there are some states that don't require an exam for licensure. Maryland still does. For the multi-state license, it is going to be a requirement.
Yeah. And I don't know if we have a specific slide about it, but I just want to mention, when we're talking about fees, there is a cost to the exam. So not just the application and the approval process from the board, and the fees I talked about earlier related to that, but the exams themselves cost money. And so it is something to take very seriously and to plan for, because it's a hefty fee. So for the bachelor's exam, I believe it's $230. For the master's exam, I believe it's 260, and I think
60.
and the clinical is 260. So that is something to incorporate into your planning, because it's hefty, and if you take it and you don't pass it, you're going to have to pay for it again at some point. So just to be aware of that.
Okay, so I think that's a good time. Somebody had asked a question earlier on about prep classes for the BSW licensing.
Yes, I saw that.
There are organizations, NASW, I think, has some prep classes. I'm not sure if, I know University of Maryland has some, they have some prep classes for the MSW. You can definitely find them, and of course pay for them through a lot of different of the continuing education providers. I will tell you, I've taken every exam in the state of Maryland. I did not do any prep classes, but what I did do was I used ASWB. When you go to their website, and they have an exam guidebook. So I used a lot of the resources that were on the ASWB website. There are a lot there. Take advantage of them and do practice questions. And
I would say the other thing is to make sure that I studied by doing the practice questions. I mean, it's important to know the information that you're getting in school, but it's also important to get used to the kind of the rhythm of the questions, and you know, there are various websites out there that offer practice questions, like Karen said, ASWB handbook. And I think they also have a paid course work that you can get through them. But there's other organizations that offer.
How many questions are on the exam, Marianne? I'm not quite sure.
There's actually 170 questions,
Okay.
but I believe it's 20 of them are not counted because they're kind of testing them to see how they do, to see if they'll be added to future exams. So it's really 150, but there's 170 questions that you have to answer on the exam. So, you know, it's a lot. It is a lot, but it's important. So, you know, make sure you're, you know, getting the rhythm of the question and really read carefully. The reading comprehension is so important because, you know, the question may state, what do you do first in such situation? Or what do you do last? Or what is the best? Although that they don't typically ask best. But it's important if you're rushing or very anxious, you know, you want to make sure you're reading carefully. And I also want to say, if you need some kind of accommodation, if you have a disability, you can request accommodations. And I really encourage people to do that because, you know, don't try to just kind of tough it out. You know, there's no shame in asking for accommodations.
And they do provide accommodations. They
do. And you know, give yourself as many advantages as you can when you're, you know, investing this much time, energy, and money into this profession. You know, give yourself every possible advantage.
Okay, so I'm going to answer a couple questions here. Okay, so if you fail the first time, do you have a time period to wait until you try again? Yes. It's 3 months.
It's 90 days.
90 days.
But if you fail the exam within 10 questions, so say you have to pass, in order to pass the exam, you have to pass 103 questions, but you get like 95 questions right, you can actually request a waiver. So Maryland has a standing agreement with ASWB that we automatically allow people to request a waiver. You actually request a waiver through ASWB, but they'll look in their system, see your Maryland, see that you have less than 10 question difference, and they'll automatically grant that to you, and you can sit for the exam again sooner.
Okay.
And our approval period is 2 years. I don't know if that was a question, but the exam approval that you get through BSWE is good for 2 years because of that very reason. If you don't pass it the first time, you might have to wait 3 months to take it again.
Right. So we're not going to, once we approve you to take the exam, you're dealing with ASWB, and we're holding your application open for 2 years while you're trying to pass the exam. Again, we hope you pass it the first time, and if you prepare and do a lot of prep questions, we have faith that you will. Okay, but again, it's a thing. So I want to kind of get through some of these questions. So we did the time period. Somebody asked a question about going straight into the master's after earning the bachelor's in social work. Do I need to take the LBSW exam, or can I wait and just take that master's exam? That is really up to you, and it depends on kind of what you're doing. Again, after I got my bachelor's degree, I had to go to work. I got a full-time job, and they did require the license. So I took the license, and then I kind of started part-time working on my master's degree. There are a lot of folks that just go right from the LBSW, they get advanced standing, and they're going to jump right into their LMSW program. You know, it just kind of depends on what your situation is. So it's not necessary to have the LBSW to start your master's program, but if you happen to be working somewhere where they're requiring it, then you might have to have the LB. Again, it kind of all depends on what your situation is. So yeah, a lot of folks just go right into the master's. They don't even bother taking the LB exam. They just take the LMSW after they finish their MSW. Yeah, the clinical social worker, can you provide therapy? You can provide therapy if you're licensed as an LMSW and you are supervised by a clinical social worker, an LCSW-C, okay? You can independently provide therapy without supervision if you're an LCSW-C, okay? An LBSW can provide supportive counseling, but they cannot do psychotherapy and they cannot diagnose. An LMSW can diagnose, but only under the supervision of a clinical social worker, okay? How hard is it to go from your MSW from having a BA in psychology? If you're going for clinical social work and that's your goal, that BA in psychology will serve you well, okay?
Yes, and that was my situation. I have a BA in psychology and went out and worked in the nonprofit world for a while before I went back to school to get my MSW.
Yep. The question, how would,
That was my question.
which question do we have?
I was thinking for answering my question. I had a question about that. I'm thinking about going into for bachelor's for psychology, and I just wanted to see how that would look if I wanted to veer into social work as well as any type of like criminal psychology, criminal justice, anything like that.
If I could add to that though, yes, I have Marianne noted, I also have my bachelor's degree and went in to get my MSW. However, if you haven't gotten the degree yet, you might want to consider the social work degree undergrad. Because of the advanced standing option, you can go from the bachelor's degree in social work and apply to the MSW, and it will take you less time to get the MSW. For many of our students, they've performed well academically and in their internship. You know, so if you know you want to get the MSW and you haven't gotten the bachelor's, you might want to consider the BSW. I will put my name and email in the chat and we can talk more. I just want to make sure there's room for other students. I know there's a lot more questions that came in.
Thank you, Ms. Morris. Thank you, Ms. Richards. I appreciate you for answering.
Sure. So a master's to become a counselor, work with women survivors of domestic violence, human trafficking. So I actually know somebody who has a bachelor's degree in social work, and she works for the House of Ruth. And then she also has, you know, within her team, she has master's level social workers working there at the House of Ruth. Same with human trafficking and domestic violence. So it really depends on kind of the agency of what they're requiring. But you will be well served to work in any of those fields with a BSW or an MSW. Somebody asked me about working at the Department of Corrections with juvenile. Yes, I did forensic social work. I did very comprehensive psychosocials for juveniles who were involved with the juvenile court. There are a lot of opportunities for BSWs working in the criminal justice field. There is a need always for folks who work directly with the juveniles in some of the detention facilities, also who do case management in the community. And some of those folks have BSWs. Some of those positions don't require the license. But if you want to veer into the behavioral health portion of corrections, doing evaluations, or doing clinical treatment with folks who are in the corrections, then you do need the license. But definitely the Department of Correction and juveniles, there are a lot of opportunities for folks who have BSWs. Let's see.
Karen, somebody asked a question about what would be the process if you don't have a social work degree, and just wanted to briefly answer that you would need to get a social work degree. So if you to be licensed, if you got an undergraduate degree in something else, then you could consider the master's Master of Social Work degree and become a social worker that way. That's what I did.
Yep. What happens if you do not renew your license and have a lapse and take a lapse in practicing and then return? Can you easily renew after the gap? So we're in the middle of that. So you can put your license in an inactive status for up to 5 years, and you can reactivate or reinstate your license within that 5-year period without having to test again. If you go past that 5-year period, then you're going to have to start the application process all over again. But yes, once you're licensed, there is that opportunity. And certainly a lot of folks who may be taking time off to start their families or do something put their license in an inactive status.
And I would just say that if you are in that inactive status less than 5 years, you would need to do the 40 CEUs or the 30 if you're LBSW prior to you applying to reactivate your license.
Yeah, there's a question about neurodivergent and a different platform for taking the exam. I don't know. I'm not sure I can answer that one. ASWB and the accommodations. Marianne, do you have any?
Yeah, I am not sure. I think that they would follow whatever accommodations you needed.
It is definitely something that is in the, it's really in the forefront. It's something.
Yeah, I believe if you have accommodations at school at your university right now, I think that you would be able to get accommodation. So I think it would be depending specifically what you need. And I know that I know that they've been working on doing things like and I think they're in the testing phase now of doing the exam for people when they're at home. So that could be potentially an accommodation that they could provide for you. I know people request extra time. I'm not sure if people can take it by paper because right now the way the exam is administered is via computer. So you go to a testing center, you're in a room sometimes with other people, and you're answering the questions on a computer screen. So I think they have accommodations related to that too. But that actually is a question better asked at ASWB. So you can go onto their website and some of those questions they might have in a FAQ, or they have an email address where you can email them as well.
I just want to thank our guests so much. This was so helpful. Again, to all our attendees, I will be sharing the PDF of the slides that they just shared with us. And we will also be sharing the recording. Not sure that will get out tonight. All of that needs to get processed, so likely will be shared with you all tomorrow. But thank you again to our guests. Thank you. Thank you.
And thank you for having us.
Thank you, everyone.
Feel free to contact us if your question didn't get answered.
Yeah, please feel free to email us at any time. We love talking to students, so and alumni, and
we had a great showing again of students and
yes, thank you so much.
And also prospective students and alumni. I saw definitely some alumni emails in here, so that was great.
All right.
Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank
Have a great evening.